Well, we're delighted to be here, and I am the project manager of over 100 people working on a project, so I never go alone. I always bring people with me. On the Zoom with me today is Dr. Himanshu Das, which is our lead engineer for the project, and Mr. Scott Limer, who is the lead designer for Clear Creek and Dickinson, which is why we brought him along. And the study is a federally funded study that's cost shared. Our cost share sponsor is the Texas General Land Office. And so on the phone today, we have Mr. Tony Williams, and he can wave at some point too, and Miss Carla Cartman, who is the Texas GLO project manager. So she and I have kind of parallel tracks. What we wanted to do today is kind of a free-flowing discussion about the study overall, and then focus specifically on the two watersheds that you guys are most concerned with. But we want to make sure you have the broad perspective to begin with. And the one thing that I thought we might start with is the internet-based information that's out there, things that we'll kind of skim over and walk through, but you can take it home and do it at on your own spare time. That way it won't be too overwhelming for us to throw a bunch of slides at you. You'll actually have some opportunities to dive into the data and get information for yourselves. So what I'm going to do very quickly, actually, I'm going to let Tony speak for a minute and just say hello while I do my sharing of the screen and get us set up.
Thank you for having us here. The Texas General Land Office is the non-federal study sponsor. That means we work hand in hand with the Corps of Engineers on this study, provide about half the funding, but it's really been a team effort to come up with a plan, a comprehensive plan that increases the resiliency of the Texas coast, includes coastal storm risk management, ecosystem restoration, and also is designed to work hand in hand with some of the other planning efforts going on in the state. So we can go over that in more detail as Kelly goes through her presentation. She's very good at it, and I'll jump in as appropriate.
So I want to just make sure, Peggy, you can see the Coastal Texas Study website.
Maybe others can. I'm on my iPad. It's always a slight delay to get through to me on the screen.
The website is up, Kelly.
Okay, so
thank you.
Very good. I'm sorry about the delays. All right, so the thing to know is that if you're looking for any information on the study and you can't find me or you can't find Tony, the thing to do is go to our website. It's https:// and then coastal study, all one word, .texas.gov. And what that does is it lands you on this web page, which basically presents you with a series of pull down menus that lets you kind of dive into the project and get background information. To begin with, right up front is the 2020 draft feasibility report that we released to the public in October of last year, went through a round of public meetings, several Q&A sessions, and a public comment period that was extended to be 75 days long this time around. In there, it talks about the overall plan, where we've come, where we're headed, and what you can expect in terms of what we are going to be presenting to Congress in this coming fall, which is September. The rest of this whole site is dedicated to quick and easy, very short synopses of what's in that report. It's about 170 pages long, but there are pictures on every page and diagrams showing you where we're going, illustrations of what we're proposing. And the idea here is with this site and with that report is to get the information across to the public in easily consumable chunks so that you can actually walk away with a feeling of what we're proposing and you can give us feedback on that. Now, we do break that report down into sections on the website, and so I'm not going to dive into those today because I think we really want to focus on Clear Creek and Dickinson, but what I do want to point you to is the fifth button down. It's something called an interactive story map, and when you click on that, what you're going to get is the Coastal Texas Story Map homepage, and this is the place where I would suggest that you come if you want to see how the footprint of the study overlaps with your community and how we're proposing to do things like evaluate the benefits that this plan has and the costs and compare those two, and to mitigate any unavoidable impacts, to avoid and minimize impacts, and to basically map out where we're headed from here, because this is not the end. The report that we released in October is just a draft report. We are in the process this week of finalizing our report and sending it to our Office of Counsel and then up our vertical chain. Our goal is to submit a signed chief's report to Congress in September of this year. And so we're rolling merrily along towards that path. What we do in the story map, though, is kind of make a bridge between ourselves and the public, and yourselves specifically, because we had every intention of having one-on-one, face-to-face public meetings to kind of roll out the recommended plan, and then COVID hit. And we were basically precluded from being able to have that face-to-face interaction. Our alternative approach then was to develop this kind of storyboard that walks you through the plans and allows you to think broader and think more holistically, but also start asking us questions, if you have any, about where we're headed and what we're proposing. If you've never used a story map, the very first thing that we provide is a little video. It's a short video that kind of gives you hints about things that you should be clicking on, or how you might drive through this page, so that you can get a feel for all the tools and technology that we've added and not be afraid of doing so. So I offer that to you. I'm not going to show that right now, but I would suggest it's fun. It's something that you can look at later on and get a feel for all of the hidden secret tools in here that you can use to get a feel for the project. We begin the storyboard by talking about our design strategy. Our approach is holistic. The idea is coastal storm risk management, as Tony mentioned, and ecosystem restoration tied together. We look at it in terms of multiple lines of defense. The intention, the very first goal, is to keep that surge out there in the Gulf and not even let it into the bay, not even let it onto the mainland. Try and protect as much of the region as possible with our frontline defenses. And then, given the fact that the bay still has a lot of water in it, even if we do close off that front line, we need to have secondary defenses. And the Clear Creek and the Dickinson sites are actually part of that bay defense system, that second line of defense. The ecosystem restoration ties into all of this by affording resiliency, a nature-based solution that actually gives us almost a third line of defense that assures functionality across the entire system and contributes holistically to getting to that kind of future look at the Texas coast, where we have a robust system that has redundant features and still provides this kind of nature-based, but also kind of reinforced resilience for the entire coast. If you don't want to read the text, we actually provide a graphic there that kind of lays out where the features are and how they are kind of coupled or grouped into those three categories of the Gulf defenses and the bay defenses and the ecosystem restoration. And I want to point this out because I'm a color girl. I love color coding. The entire site is geared towards dark greens being associated with the Gulf defenses, the blues being associated with the bay defenses, and then a navy blue kind of being associated with the ecosystem restoration. The website, as I pointed out, did have a link to the report, but the story map does too. So if you just dive into the story map and you want to go get the report, it's easy. You just click on it here and get it. The things to be aware of in terms of the plan, in terms of its benefits, the cost at this point is about $26.2 billion plus or minus. That cost basically provides a return of almost $2.28 billion yearly. We have a positive benefit cost ratio as a result. For every dollar we're spending, we get about $1.96 back. And that does assure us about 77% reduction in the damage to structures that we're seeing without a project, and 66% of reduction in the flooding of critical infrastructure across the entire region. Because we're we received a mandate from Congress to look at not only coastal storm risk management, but ecosystem restoration, we also get to claim about 6,600 acres of ecosystem restoration across the entire system, which is about 21,000 habitat units. That's a way of measuring the benefits in terms of birds and fish that can't really get a feel for dollars. And so that's how we quantify the benefits or the return on the investment for the ecosystem restoration. I did mention that we had our public meetings. We had 3 4-hour-long Q&A sessions during that public comment period, and we recorded them. And so the whole story map we walked through in each of those sessions. We're not going to do that today because it took so long, but what we do offer you is an opportunity to hit any of these 3 buttons and basically have a full-on Q&A session where you can see what we presented in those sessions and then hear what the public had to say in terms of questions of our team, where we basically had a dialogue with them to answer their concerns and give them a feel for what we had proposed and how that would affect them. After those Q&A sessions on the story map, what you'll see is what we call the deck of cards. And this is the meat of the story map. It basically is laying out the proposed features in cobbled together small groups so that if you're interested in the ring, you don't have to look at the gates. You can just go straight to the ring. Or if you're interested in Clear Lake and Dickinson, you can go to those and you don't have to go through all the other pieces of the plan just to be able to get the information you're after. Before I launch the Clear Lake and Dickinson card, though, I want to show you a couple more features on this front screen. One of them is something we call the interactive tools. When we get into the story map for Clear Lake and Dickinson, or if we go into any of the other features, you'll find that there are some pretty innovative tools in there. If you don't delve into every single card, you might not realize that they're there. So we've actually pulled them out to the front so that you can have a look at those individually if you're interested. And then just below them is the interactive map for the entire project. This is a GIS-based driven map. In other words, it's going to have layers that slowly overlay. And then as you zoom in, you can roll your mouse and zoom into the map and get a feel for the entire plan as a whole, or you can click and look at individual features and parts of the plan. What we're looking at here is the Galveston Bay Inlet because I zoomed in right there. You can use this little magnifying glass to type in an address like 5200 Seawall Boulevard, and it will automatically zoom straight to that location so that you can see exactly what's happening in your area. If you'll pull back by rolling back on the mouse, you can see that the gated structure is detailed here. The ecosystem features are detailed, the beach and dunes along the front line, the ring barrier on the backside of Galveston. And then if you pull the map, you just hold your mouse on the left, you click it down and hold it and drag, and you can zoom into this region and basically see the structures at Dickinson and at Clear Lake. And this yellow area is the non-structural measures that we are also proposing for this region. I keep saying this region because I live up in League City, so it's this region for me, but it's not for Tony, who lives in Austin. But the point here is this is the plan as a total. So if I pull all the way back, you will see that there are features being proposed all the way down to Corpus Christi. And so we have in one stop, basically the entire plan. These are all clickable features. You can touch on them and then a box will pop up and tell you what you're seeing. And it's just kind of an overall view, broad picture of what we're proposing. It's not the details that you're interested in yet. So what we'll do for that is to go diving into the cards. We'll scroll back up and we'll click on the Clear Creek and Dickinson card after I talk one last time about those kind of multiple lines of defense. Our first line of defense includes the Bolivar Road gate system and the beach and dunes that are on both sides of that. And that's what that diagram is showing you here, the gated system across the inlet. Our storm modeling indicates that over 60% of the risk reduction is achieved by simply providing a barrier across that inlet in advance of storms. We do know, though, that the water will hit that barrier and roll off, kind of reflect to the right and left. And so we're including proposals for beach and dune systems on both of the barrier systems to the left and right, the barrier islands, and improvements to the seawall. We do know that it won't stop a hurricane. It will repel the surge, but the hurricane itself will pass over the islands and land in the back bay and slosh that water around quite a bit. And so our second lines of defense are here in Clear Lake and in Dickinson, gated structures with pumping stations associated with them. And then the water will push onto the backside of Galveston Island. That's what happened in Ike, for example. And so the proposal is to install a barrier, a reinforced barrier on the backside of Galveston Island and include pumping stations there as well. And if you're interested in those features and we have time, we'll go to those afterwards. But what we really thought we would do today is focus on the Dickinson Bay and the Clear Lake systems and talk to you a little bit about those in detail. And then we can pop over to these other cards if you're interested. So what I'll do is push over to the Clear Lake and Dickinson Bay system card and talk to you about story maps in general, and then ask Scott and HD to talk about the decision criteria that led us to the designs we've got thus far, but also where we're headed with these designs. And ultimately, inevitably, your question is going to be who's going to pay for this. And at that point, I'm going to ask Tony to talk a little bit about what's happening in the Texas legislature right now, and we can talk about cost sharing and going forward from there. Just to begin with the Clear Lake and Dickinson Bay card, the thing to be aware of is that every story map in the entire system that we've developed has a similar look and feel. It always has kind of a front slide showing you where we're talking about, but then the very first thing we try and do is address the threat. Why we are here? Why did we receive federal funding to even look into this and investigate it? And what is the threat with the project and without the project? And so what we provide here is one of the early tools in the tool deck, a swiper, a storm model swiper. And what it allows you to do is basically if you float over the model and you click on that gray bar in the center and you drag it all the way to the left, this is the level of threat we are seeing in this particular area without a project, without the closures across the inlet, the front bay system, the back bay system, excuse me. And if you click on that gray line again and you pull it to the right, what you're seeing is the reduction in risk as a result of what we're proposing. These models are hydrologic models. They're storm models based on over 600 different simulated storms that we may have not seen yet. Types of storms that range from very small events, a 10-year event, all the way up to a 10,000-year event. And it just kind of covers the probability of us seeing those types of storms in this region. We are currently basing our designs on these storms, but when we move into the next phase of the study and we get funding from Congress to continue our designs and our plans and specs, we will probably repeat some of this storm modeling and hone it and refine it based on changes that we're likely to make to our designs. And also we will be likely making changes to the designs as a result of things like minimization of impacts to the environment, social acceptability, and engineering performance, all with this trade-off of costs and how we'll get down to the final plans and specs. I will point out, though, that these maps that you see in here, if you get too close to the landscape, if you zoom in too close, these maps will disappear. And the thing is, and the reason that is that they are not FEMA maps. They're not FEMA flood maps. They're not to be used for evaluation of real estate value or purchases of insurance or setting insurance rates. They are simply being used as a planning tool for our study. And so if you zoom in and try and find your house, that water level layer will disappear, I have to say. So that's one thing to be aware of when you're using the tools, is to understand what they're being used for and what they cannot be used for. After we present the threat, the next thing we do in every story map is to present our solution, what we are proposing for this particular area to address that threat. And so it's at this point that I'm going to open the mic and ask Scott to come in and give us a little bit of detail. We'll start with Clear Lake, and then we'll move down to Dickinson. And it's Peggy, it's not going to be a presentation. It's going to be us talking and then you all asking questions from here on out. So just feel free to raise your hand or stop us and ask questions as we go through the designs. And actually, I'll stop for a minute and ask, are there any questions in what I've presented thus far? Well, okay. I talked fast. I'm surprised. I'll tell you what, we'll still keep it open. If you guys have questions that you're thinking of, you can, I think there's a chat box somewhere, Sarah, that they can type into, or just stop us and then we can answer those questions. I'm gonna stay on the hot mic, but I'm gonna ask Scott to step up now, and I'm gonna zoom into the southern portion. And as you're speaking, I'll click and talk or click and add to your conversation. Scott?
Sure. So Scott Limer here supporting Kelly with a description of what the Clear Lake closure structure or gate system is. Kelly, if you'll zoom back out, I'll do a quick overview just to kind of end a little bit more than that. So,
thanks.
So what we're showing here is everywhere where we're assuming that there will be some work. And again, keep in mind, this is very draft, this is preliminary assessment. There's a lot of modeling to be done, a lot of refinement to be done on the exact location of these features. But basically what we've, through our hydraulic modeling and such, we've realized we need to put something in place to address the potential for the bay flooding into the Clear Lake area through the Clear Creek channel or canal. So what we've got is a tie into high ground kind of on the south end, and high ground is kind of a relative term here where we will work out the exact contours and where it ties into. We talk about a 17-foot elevation for a flood wall, but we don't tie into a 17-foot contour, and that's got to do with wave run up and some other reasons behind why there's a difference there. But we start at the south end with the flood wall. We come across the current Clear Lake channel with a gated structure, navigation, and tidal exchange. We continue with the flood wall until we come up to another gated structure to allow for tidal exchange, and then a pump station. That pump station has a capacity of 20,000 cubic feet per second for pumping. From there, we continue with the flood wall around and go back up towards the north and tie into 528 Anassa Road 1 area. We've got some improvements on the canal to get water to the pump station, and we've got improvements on the canal to get water out into Galveston Bay from the pump station. So kind of an overarching, big picture. This is where we're talking about and what we're talking about doing. If you want to zoom into the southern part of flood wall. So from where we tie in on the southern end, we generally follow along what's shown here on the drawing. The lines on the drawing were placed based off of existing infrastructure and kind of property boundaries, not to cut property up into numerous pieces, and also not to take in and impact a lot of known existing infrastructure. We do know that the bridge has been expanded, and this kind of accounts for that. It took what we thought was the plan when this was laid out into account, and how it would interact with what we were proposing. There will need to be some tweaks with this alignment, and we're aware of that kind of as we move forward. So flood wall section brings us all the way up to Clear Creek. And at there we have a combination of floodgates that allow tidal exchange when they're open, allow Clear Creek to drain out when they're open, and then help to restrain or mitigate any surge coming back into Clear Lake when they're closed. So that's kind of the yellow line there that's represented. The turquoise blue line blue-green line is a navigation structure. We've currently got that sized with the federal channel that's there. There is a authorized federal channel that comes through Clear Lake at 75-foot opening there that's noted in the write-up. That's sized to match that channel. There is room during the refinement of this plan to adjust that to be a little more in line with the current use for that area. We understand that there's really kind of a two-way channel through there for recreational vessels, and there's traffic that goes both on the north and south of the center abutment for the bridge, and so there's ability to refine that when we move into PED to account for the usage of the channel. It's part of the refinement that we would do as we got further involved in the studying. Right now, that's proposed to be a sector gate, the same type of sector gate that we've built in New Orleans after Katrina, the same type of sector gate that we're proposing on Dickinson Bayou and on the Galveston Ring Barrier Levee. The floodgates for circulation gates, those are also structures that the Corps of Engineers has built in the last 15 to 20 years, along with the flood wall. The flood wall being our standard pile-founded T-wall design that we've used post-Katrina in New Orleans, and we are currently constructing on the Sabine Galveston project at Port Arthur and Freeport and in Orange, and what we're proposing to do here. So I will pause here real quick and see if there are any questions as I've talked really fast to get us to this point. So I will open up for questions.
This is Samantha Heritis. I have a question. Are you coordinating with the Lower Clear Creek project? Because there's been some discussion while they've been studying that project that the existing outlets are undersized to for Clear Creek, like to get to let out into clear, into the.
Correct. So the part of the project and part of our task is that we can't induce any damages. So we wouldn't be able to constrict the flow at all. So we anticipate needing to add in additional capacity or additional flow out of Clear Lake, because we're going to have structures into place, a navigation structure, these circulation structures, they're going to take up cross-sectional area of the channel. And so we're looking at addressing that, some through potentially increasing the circulation gates to the south and to the north of this area, and also adding in circulation capability potentially out of the north part of this, which is off the screen up by the pump station. Again, all of that has got to be thoroughly studied in PED, and we haven't gotten to that point yet. And that coordination with the individual groups of what's going on will be one of the first steps that we take moving forward after we get past this point. This is again very preliminary, so we know that there's going to be concerns with currents that may be developed in here due to tidal exchange. We know that we need to be cognizant of additional tidal exchange, because Clear Lake doesn't have, or has a set amount of tidal exchange now, that we don't want to alter that as we move forward. So there's things that we're tracking. We just haven't had the ability in this study to get to ground truth those, and that would be some of the first things that we would do as we moved out of the feasibility into PED.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
You at a point where you can say something about the capacity of the pumping stations being 20,000 cubic feet a second? Is that sufficient capacity to allow channelization of Clear Creek all the way back to 288, so we can get away from the paradigm of trying to dig detention space everywhere and just sit on the water?
If possible, I would like to come back to the pump station in a second when we get there along the alignment, and then we can talk specifically on pump station capacity, and I will turn that over to HD to talk about how we ended up with the 20,000, if that's acceptable to continue here until we get up to there.
Sure.
Okay. Any other questions on the closure or crossing of Clear Creek, current Clear Creek, the navigation channel, the flood wall that leads us up to that structure?
Scott, do you want to tell them what this gray area is? Right here.
Sure. So the areas that we've noted in the gray are areas where we are accounting for the potential need to do any sort of dredging or channelization in order to address the flow that we were talking about that I mentioned earlier on this section and also at the pump station. So those are all areas where we are acknowledging a potential to need to come in and do some sort of manipulation of the bay bottom in some manner to address the flow of the water to the structures.
And the white line and the yellow lines, if you want to talk about those really quick.
Oh, the white
lines are permanent. Yeah.
Yeah, the white lines are permanent easements for the project, and the yellow lines are yellow shaded areas, or orange shaded areas would be more work easements, where we would need to take and have access during construction. And then the white lines would be permanent easements that would come into as part of the federal project.
Scott, this is Peggy. I know that the design for the gates is not new, that it's a proven concept, but can you give us an idea of what the reliability performance factor is for the gates?
Yes, so they've got the sluice gates and the slide gates and the sector gates that we're proposing here in the initial plan have a long history of functionality and performance with the Corps. They're similar in concept to what we've been doing for 100+ years on our vertical sluice gates and lift gates, as far as having rails that the gates slide in, having a structure that the gate rails sit in, having that connected to the deep foundation and a cutoff wall underneath, and then having some sort of mechanical motorized lift and to raise and lower the gates. So all of that, including backup generation and control center, backup power generation control center on site to be able to handle, and then a manual override in case the electrical doesn't work, a way that you can manually take and set the gates in place. So all of those have, I don't have a specific reliability index number that they would have been assigned, but they do have a performance history that we've gotten fairly comfortable or very comfortable with for their reliability. When we do our potential failure mode analysis, gate closure is really not a risk driver in all of our potential failure mode analysis, really because the flow is limited through the gates. Even as you get into some of these larger gates, you've still got such a small restricted opening compared to no opening at all along a given alignment that they don't really run a risk at that. And there's also for maintenance, there will be a bulkhead set in to be able to dewater it. And so that is considered, most of the time, it could be set up on this specifically as a redundant feature that you could put a bulkhead in if the gate was under maintenance or did not work during an event. If you had time, you could deploy a bulkhead to add a layer of protection. But they've proven to be very reliable features. The sector gates bring a little bit of uncertainty in there because of the size of them and the complexity of the mechanics with them, but that's also something that we've got them deployed in New Orleans, and we've learned a lot of lessons pre-Katrina and post-Katrina on what's been built over there. So they're very reliable structures.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so were there any other questions on the Clear Creek closure and crossing?
I have one more question really quick. Have y'all looked at the effects of sea level rise on the system yet? Or is that like in the future?
I will let HD discuss a little bit of the sea level analysis that's been done. At this time, with what we have seen, what we're proposing for this feature, we'll not need to have adaptable components to it throughout the sea level rise that we are considering for the project. But HD will be able to talk in detail on sea level rise and how it's been incorporated into the project as a whole and this feature specifically.
Okay.
Scott,
hi.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead and finish your question.
Yeah. Scott, Dave Person. I'm sorry, I got disconnected for a bit. Has anybody asked any issues or what reliability factor do you have with the pumping system itself?
So I was gonna hold pumping questions until we got up to the pump station and then
Okay,
dive into them there.
I'll save it then. Thank you.
Okay.
And HD, before you jump in on the sea level rise, I want to make sure that it's clear that these features are not designed to hold back sea level rise. They are designed to be closed temporarily in advance of storms to basically keep the surge from coming up into the lakes, the Clear Creek system. That HD is going to talk about the fact that the Corps of Engineers is mandated to incorporate sea level rise scenarios into all of their planning and designs, not just one scenario, but multiple scenarios so that we can look across a range of high, medium, and low. And the question is not why it's happening or whether it's happening, but if it were to happen, is the system adaptive and still performing at a certain level, or does it need to be adapted to basically withstand more frequent storms, stronger storms, more intensification? So just to be aware, you wouldn't be shutting these gates to keep sea level rise out. That's the one thing that we need to make sure is clear before HD jumps into his analysis. Okay?
This is Samantha again. Has there been any thought about looking at preventing, trying to incorporate preventing sea level rise into Clear Lake in the future? Because with that lower Clear Creek study, they're showing pretty significant impacts like all throughout League City and downstream from sea level rise in the future.
So the answer to that is not with this study. What we were mandated or allowed to look at with our funding is what the effects would be if sea level rise were to happen and that led to more surge or more climate change like related factors that would intensify the storm and push the surge up the channel, not day-to-day sea level rise issues.
Yeah, and before HD gives his explanation, I'll add to Kelly's in that the system wasn't designed to address any of the nuisance flooding that will come from from sea level rise. It won't have any impact in that. Now, the specific operations of the system and when the Clear Lake gate system will be closed and how it will be operated have not been fully defined yet because the O&M manuals, the studying and everything else hasn't played into that. If there's, is there opportunity there to, on smaller storms, lessen the frequency of return of nuisance flooding into Clear Lake because the gates are able to be operated and keep that out on a smaller event? That'll have to be addressed when we get into PED and see what those frequencies are of that when sea level rise starts to impact Galveston Bay with or without the structure. So those kind of questions and that kind of detail is something that we're going to get fully into in PED and could there be potential there? That'll have to see how it falls in with the authorization and what we can find out with PED and how that fits into the O&M. But nuisance flooding is not something that was looked at for the Ring Levee in Galveston, for Dickinson Bio, or for Clear Lake, or for areas anywhere behind the ring barrier. I mean, behind the coastal barrier. HD, would you like to?
Yeah, so if I can add a few things on the design and in lieu of some of the questions that came into the capacity. We all know the complexity of the Clear Creek and the Dickinson system. Probably Clear Creek is more complex. It's a 260 square mile of watershed. One thing that we all have to recognize that all the pumps are designed. It's not to pump out the water that is like during an extreme events, for example, the Harvey. If you want to drain the water fast, that was not the objective of the design. The design is if you shut down the gate and you're trying to block the water that is coming out of the Clear Creek to the Galveston Bay. And that means you need to extract the water without any stacking the water backside on the gate. So that was one of the design criteria. And to understand that, we all have to kind of recognize the complexity or the joint probability between the surge and the rainfalls. So sometimes they do not occur simultaneously, but sometimes it does happen during the for example, Hurricane Ike. So there is some understanding about the joint probability between the surge and the rainfall. So the way that we designed the criteria we set between 10 to 25-year rainfall coupled with 100-year surge conditions. So if both happens and you have overtopping and you are shutting the gate for a few hours, then water is stacking behind, and then you need to drain this water out because you need to not to make these things worse from the existing conditions. So that's how we came up with the current design capacity, which is roughly about 20,000 CFS. We are pretty comfortable at this stage that this is good enough to address this and the questions about this joint interaction between the surge and the rainfall with some between 10 to 25-year intensity. We do recognize the sea level rise conditions, and let me step back a little bit and talk a little bit about the adaptations thing. Kelly talked about the comprehensive systems, the beach and the Bolivar gate systems into the Galveston Inlet. Then she talked about the ring barrier systems and all these ancillary features like the Clear Creek and Dickinson structure systems. In this comprehensive system, there are a few features that you can adapt to, are adaptable. For example, if you want to put the Galveston ring barrier systems, if you design the foundation good enough or wide enough, you can put some extra layer of concrete, and this can be adaptive to feature sea level rise. But some features, for example, the Bolivar gate systems, once you built it, it's done. You cannot change it. You cannot change the sill depth, or you cannot change the crest elevation. Same is true for the Clear Creek and Dickinson gated systems. Once you have a comfortable understanding about the top of the elevations, it's pretty much done. You cannot adapt to this crest elevation. So that's why we looked into this sea level rise conditions. Right now, we are pretty comfortable that it can sustain to the design standard about intermediate sea level rise condition, because Clear Creek and Dickinson gated system work in conjunctions with the Bolivar gated system. So that's why the system into the Clear Creek and Dickinsons are relatively lower, because you are protecting the Gulf side by the Bolivar gate. So right now, back to your sea level rise questions, we're pretty comfortable that it can sustain to the intermediate sea level rise condition, because we recognize that it is a less adaptable features. Now, whether it is the final design in terms of the pumping capacity, pumping operations, even the right alignment that Scott is referring, we are not quite done yet. It's some stakeholders involvement and some other ancillary studies we need to be kind of blend if we go to the pad phase. But for cost estimate, in terms of the design of the gate, the width, I'm still thinking that there is a rooms for changing the width a little bit without bumping the cost. Plus circulation gates to putting more circulation gates to improve the water quality. So these are some of the things that needs to be done during the pad phase, including the pumping capacity that we just talked about.
So I want to clarify something that I want to clarify a couple of things that HD said, which is when he said it cannot be adapted, what he means is it's cost prohibitive for us to be adapting this later in time. And so what we are doing is proposing a design that is already somewhat adapted. It's already conservative. In other words, it's already anticipating. It's not designed for today's flooding scenarios. It's designed for a future flooding scenario with a sea level rise scenario on top of that. The intermediate at Clear Creek is about what, HD, 4 feet, 3 feet?
No, it's a 2 feet for the next 100 years. But if you go to the high sea level rise conditions, and it depends on the believer or non-believers, it's 5 feet. It's about timing. It's not about how much sea level rise is. It's how fast it is increasing and what is the right timing for that trigger. I don't think we have any certainty on that. Based on the measurements, it's a foot sea level rise that we have seen into the Galveston based on the PR21 gauge. That's a low carb in the USAGOE term, but we are also building this intermediate condition, which is roughly about 2.1 feet, I think.
And then the last thing he mentioned, there's actually two things he mentioned. One of them was that this system was designed as a system of systems. In other words, the features at Clear Lake and at Dickinson are scaled, assuming that that frontline defense is constructed and in place. So in other words, the Galveston Bay Inlet has to be closed for the Clear Creek system to work at the scale that we've proposed it. So it's not just build the Clear Lake system and don't build the front line of defense, because you'll be faced with a much larger surge in that scenario. And so what we have proposed is a way of cost savings, basically being allowed to assume that that frontline defense is in place allows us to scale this one back a bit. And so that's something to be aware of when you look at this as separable elements, because they're really not. They're really a system of systems, and they're dependent on each other for their particular design concept. The second thing I wanted to point out, and what both Scott and HD have mentioned, but kind of casually, is that we still have a lot of design to do for the Clear Lake and the Dickinson features. They're second line defenses, so they haven't been given a lot of attention yet, but in the next phase, which we've kind of casually called PED, that's pre-construction engineering and design, we were given special approval from headquarters to continue design refinements in that phase and to go out with additional public comment periods and additional NEPA compliance documents. So additional supplemental environmental impact statements, which carry with them more public meetings and more public comment periods and more opportunity for stakeholders like yourselves to be able to engage with us, so that as we start proposing things like this, it is not set in stone. We still have a lot of time and a lot of opportunity to advance these designs, and that's why we're talking to you early. Now, it may seem like it's late, but it's not, because of this tiered process that we've been approved for. We're allowed to continue doing more design refinements in the next phase after Congress authorizes us to move forward. So I think what we want to do, we've been talking for about 30 minutes or so. I want to make sure we get to the rest of this design and get down to Dickinson as well. So Scott, if you wouldn't mind going ahead and starting up the line and heading towards the second outlet.
Sure. And after we come off of the closure structures across the Clear Lake Channel, we're going to come up with a pile-founded T-wall, flood wall, until we get up to where the current second outlet exists. Excuse me, that orange line that's there, and Kelly, if you'll zoom out and kind of give a bigger picture of the pump station. So at this location, we are anticipating, in order to get the water to the pump station, that we'll need to be able to feed the pumps when all of the pumps are running. We're going to have to do some stabilization and some deepening of that section of water that leads to the second outlet right now. So the orange features that are shown there, excuse me, are, sorry, I'm getting choked up talking about this.
Do you have something to drink? You good?
So the orange features are kind of a sheepile wall, combi wall, structural feature that will hold the earth that's behind the wall back so that we can deepen those channels without impacting any of the land that's adjacent to the channel. So that's that area there is anticipated to need some dredging and some shoreline stabilization so that the water will be able to get to the pump station. This will, the line of flood risk management will continue with the blue line along until it reaches the yellow line. I mean, the bright yellow line there. That yellow line would be additional tidal exchange feature, or it will take the place kind of the second outlet that's currently there that Harris County Flood Control District manages. So that piece there will take an outlet to be removed. The feeder roads, the surface streets there to allow that water to get in. A second gated structure there that will allow either additional flow out of Clear Lake during a rainfall event, or it will allow tidal exchange if there needs to be tidal exchange across that area there. Then we've got the pump station. The pump station is, the footprint there is representative of 5,000 CFS pump stations, which were the design for the Galveston ring barrier system. So again, there's additional refinement that will come into this to streamline this, to smooth this out, to make this be a little bit more in line with what we will go out and build. There'll be some efficiencies by increasing pumping capacity for individual pumps versus having numerous pumps to get to 20,000 CFS. But this is where we're at this stage of the design in order to take and account for that amount of pumping capacity at this location. From the pump station, we circle around the abutment of 146 and start to go back up towards NASA Road 1. But before we pull up too far, I know there was a question on the pump station, or a couple, so I wanted to give a quick pause here for questions regards to the pump station.
I know they asked about reliability, and I know they asked about capacity.
Okay, so reliability is, the reliability question is one that we feel the plans that we are proposing, the pumps that we are proposing, you know, we have pump stations throughout the Corps of Engineers. We have pump stations that were built very recently in New Orleans. We have pump stations that have been functioning in Texas City since the late 60s, early 70s. And so we're comfortable with the mechanics of pump station to say that it's reliable. There's always potential for a mechanical failure or for something to happen either during a storm or after a storm or during routine operations. And there's redundancy built into these pump stations to be able to reduce the overall risk. Part of the reason for us proposing the 4,000 or 5,000 CFS kind of pump station footprint is that now you've got more pumps. So while you have more operating, maintenance, and those issues, you also have more pumps to handle the load. So if you lose a pump, it's not going to be as impactful as if you had one pump instead of 3 pumps. But there's an efficiency in there that's got to be captured in order to make the system really functional and optimize the system's efficiency.
This is Larry Milliken. Understanding that there was some concern about the riverine flooding of Clear Creek and Clear Lake on that lower Clear Creek study that's finishing up. It appears that your diagram shows that there's going to be improved conveyance from what we have now to what you're proposing, just because of the ability to get more water to the pump. Is that a safe assumption?
Yes, the pump station will far exceed the capacity of the yellow line gravity structures there. So you'll be able to get and far exceed what's currently there through the second outlet. So you'll get a lot more water to that line. How that goes out through the yellow line for the circulation or the drainage features there is still going to have to be studied by us when we get further along. And having that study would help us to size those gates to say, maybe we need them to be a little bit bigger than what we're currently we have them. I would have to dig back into the engineering appendix to see the exact dimensions, but they're large gates. We wanted to account for the ability to flow additional water out of the Clear Lake area when we propose this plan, because it's easier to scale it back cost-wise than it is to scale it up cost-wise. So we anticipated having fairly large gates there for circulation and drainage out of Clear Lake. Now, we've got to stay within our authorization, which Kelly will emphasize. So where we're at and what's currently there and how that looks when we move forward with this project, how that relates back to this other project that's been referenced is going to have to be fleshed out in PID.
No, sure. I understand that we've got a long way to go before we get to that point. And just like that study that I was referencing, it needs to be published too. So it just appears to me that there's a lot more conveyance through your secondary outlet with your design, just to afford the ability for those pumps to function as much as they need to function. And I was just wanting to point that out. But thank you, Scott.
I assume to some degree we could also theoretically use the pump station to lower Clear Lake in advance of heavy riverine flooding or heavy upstream rainfall events.
And so now I'm going to ask Tony to talk. Because
May I step in real quick? I had a question for Scott. My name is Hill Lars. I heard the term used earlier, nuisance flooding, and just so that I can wrap my head around it, what is your definition of nuisance flooding in this instance?
Okay, I want to be a little careful answering that because I don't want that to be quoted as an Corps of Engineers answer for nuisance flooding. If I give it, I think HD would be the one that would need to give an official Corps of Engineers answer. My reference was just the increase in sea level is going to cause a higher water level in Galveston Bay, which is going to cause roads to go underwater, 4 times a year instead of the current 1 to 2 times a year. That's what I was referring to as nuisance flooding, is just the additional backwater that's there because of a higher tide. But I'm sure that there is a specific definition that the Corps of Engineers has adapted, and that is not it. I'm 99.9% sure.
Scott, I think you did perfectly. It's just sometimes the king tide and sometimes if the sea level the rises, and then you have more prone to especially the low-lying area that has more prone to flooding due to this king tide and sea level rise. So these are called nuisance flooding.
Okay.
So there was a question right before that, though, about operating the gates to drain the lake because of upper watershed rainfall events, basically flood risk management instead of coastal storm risk management. And one thing to be cognizant of, at least for the Corps of Engineers, is that we, during these types of studies and the construction of these types of projects, we cost share the studies 50-50, and we cost share the construction and design of these kinds of projects about 65-35, depending on what type of feature you're talking about. But once they're constructed, we turn the keys over to a cost share sponsor who is 100% responsible for operations of those features and maintenance and repairs of those features. And so that's one of the reasons I was bringing kind of Tony along into this conversation. He is the representative for the cost share sponsor right now for the feasibility study level. But he knows that and we are very cognizant of the fact that Corps won't be operating this afterwards. It will be a cost share sponsor that's operating this for purposes that could very well be different from what we originally designed it for. We're not designing it, or we're not mandated to design it to address flood risk management, which is rainfall on the watershed that's basically causing flooding. We're designing it for repelling or attenuating surge coming in as a result of a hurricane. And so that's one of the things to be very, very aware of. This is not designed to deal with a Harvey-like situation. This is designed to deal with an Ike-like situation. And so that's something that I want to make sure everybody understands.
Kind of building on what Kelly had said, and this is Tony Williams with the Texas General Land Office. The General Land Office is the study sponsor. That means we're working with the Corps on a feasibility study. The General Land Office is not in the position to be a construction sponsor. We don't have the non-federal construction sponsor requirements that the Corps has to have. But currently, the Texas legislature is developing a 5-county district that could move into that position. HB 3029 and SB 1160 are proposed legislation. Those are identical that are being considered by the Texas legislature now, that would create a 5-county district that would be able to move in and be the non-federal construction sponsor for this. It would be able to build it and then have ongoing capacity to operate and maintain the structures associated with this. It would anticipate that they would work closely with the entities in the area that are responsible for flood control. Again, that is something that is being worked out by the legislature, and hopefully that'll be passed and that'll be formed in the upcoming months to be able to answer and address these questions. Like I said, the GLO is being supportive. We will continue to provide information to the legislature, but again, it's going to be operated and maintained by this new entity if it moves forward. So I can answer questions on that as well if anybody has any.
I have one question. This is Robert Griffon. In regards to the 75-foot floating sector gate in the southernmost inlet, I don't understand why we didn't put a pumping station like we have in the second inlet, in the first inlet too. If there's concern that during a storm event or surge event, and you're opening one at a 2-hour interval or a 4-hour interval, and we're trying to let water out, if you have both situations where you have a surge and a riverine rainfall event, why wouldn't we design 2 pumping stations?
So we've and H&H or HD can expand on the H&H analysis. I'm not sure how in detail we want to get with that, or if we want to have a side meeting to take and really get into the H&H discussion. As far as putting 2 pump stations there, the efficiencies of having everything located at one building is why we put things up on the north, and also footprint, because we don't really have a lot of room here. And unless we were going to start taking existing infrastructure or existing, and I don't want to be quoted as saying taking property, because that's not ever a good thing to say. But if we were going to relocate it somewhere else, we were going to have significant impacts to existing property. So we kind of found a spot to put it to where we weren't looking to have huge impacts to private property. And we have the canal that goes between this sector gate and the drainage structure, or the pump station there, to help convey water from both areas out to the pump station. So we felt that at least at this level of design, that this was a good preliminary, a good draft proposal to grab all of the pumping that we would need for a coincidental event. So if you've got a surge and you've got rainfall happening, the pump station will be on, and it will be on pumping as much water as it can. And there's going to be a timing in there of where the water on the outside gets down low enough that you can open the gates, but you may still keep running the pump station, and you may run the pump station for a whole day after you've opened the gates, just to make sure that you get all of the water out. And that's also why we are looking at the circulation gates on the backside, because we don't want to short circuit our pump. And during pumping and open gate activities, you're not going to be able to have that top gate open, because you're going to potentially short circuit it there. So we've got, again, a lot of questions here to get into to get refinement as we move forward, but we think we've captured at least that you know, a footprint to start with, I guess.
Okay, and is there with the yellow line that says it's a circulation gate at the pump station, is there no reason to have an open gate system there to let water in or out? Is that just a solid gate?
So that will probably be multiple gates, and there will most likely be some that are strictly circulation gates, meaning that there's only one form of closure. There's one sluice gate that lifts up and it allows water to go both ways. And then some of those could be drainage structures that would have a sluice gate and a flap gate. So if the water's higher on the land side, you could open the sluice gate and let water out. Versus having water come back in through it. So again, the modeling is going to have to be done to show exactly what those are and how we may shift this or adjust this to the footprint to account for the cross-sectional area that we need to maintain that flow out so that we don't induce damages. That's one thing that I'm not sure if I mentioned earlier or not, but we'll have to go through all this analysis to ensure we don't induce damages under any of these circumstances with the building of this structure. So that will fall into that category of refinement when we get it to that point.
Okay, thank you.
So the top of this feature goes up all the way to NASA.
Yeah. So we run up there and tie into the existing ground at that location. We're aware of a couple of things that will need a little bit further analysis. You know, Taylor's Bio goes up and gets real close to Bayport. So we've got to look at that to make sure we don't flank the system up there. We have to look at this and make sure that we've tied into high enough ground that we don't flank the system here. So those will be some refinements to when we really get in and update the modeling and how does that look, you know, years out with that incorporation of the sea level rise and such. But those are refinements, questions that we'll still address when we move forward into PED. But this is in general the footprint and a description of the system features for the draft proposal for Clear Lake Gate System.
So I want to add in something real quick. As Kelly has already said, there will be tiered NEPA, or there will be an opportunity for further environmental impacts. As this system is refined, you know, we'll have to further identify any impacts to the habitat in there. There's Almond Bayou back in there, a lot of habitat. So those are additional environmental impacts will have to be done as this design is refined to make sure any adverse impacts to the natural resources in this area or any other resources are identified and mitigated for.
Okay.
All right.
Did we want to go to Dickinson? Were there any other questions on Clear Lake before we go to Dickinson?
All right, let's cruise down to Dickinson. We've got about 10 minutes left, maybe. So let's see if we can do this.
Well, I can do Dickinson real quick.
Well, can I ask one more question on Clear Lake? Will this structure allow the upstream communities to utilize more conveyance and channelization in their flood planning, or will they need to keep utilizing plans to dig detention basins and try and find some way to handle the water without moving it downstream?
Okay, I'm going to probably defer to Kelly, or I think Travis may have been on here to be able to really give you an answer to that. My take on it is that as we get into PED, we will be able to refine these features to address the hydraulic loading from Clear Lake and from Galveston Bay based off whatever those design parameters are that were given at the time. Outside of that, I'm going to have to defer to our planners or PM to say how we're going to incorporate upstream concerns into that if it's different than what we're looking at presently.
So I do know there's something called betterments, and that we're not allowed to address a particular concern that doesn't have to do with coastal storm risk management. So that's the one thing to be aware of, is that we got funding and will get funding in a of a particular color. And so we're only allowed to really address the concerns and risks based on that particular threat. It's not to say that we're not already aware of what's going on with the planning and the designs of the different construction projects upstream, and that and as Scott has mentioned over and over and over again, we will not make it worse. We will not induce damages as a result of our designs. We cannot necessarily change our designs so that what you're proposing happens. That is not something that we can intentionally do because it's then called a betterment.
This is Samantha. I just think it's really important to coordinate on this now, because if this starts getting built and you know there's plans to put more capacity into Clear Lake, I mean that could completely prevent us from building the projects that we plan on building for Lower Clear Creek.
Let me give you an outlook though, just so that you understand. We don't have funding to build this. It's not, we don't have a cost share sponsor yet. That's what the Texas legislature is working on right now. We have to finish a report that basically provides a very clear recommendation to Congress that there's a federal interest in going forward and that there is a cost share sponsor out there. Congress has to then authorize us to move into the next phase of the project and appropriate funding. That could take 3 to 5 years. So we're looking at best, getting an authorization in the WRDA 2022 bill. So, you know, another year or so. And that means we would not even see engineering and design funding to start the plans and specs until 2023 at the earliest. And our estimates for construction of the features is outwards of 20 years. And Clear Lake and Dickinson are at the back end of that time frame. Because the first #1 feature that needs to be built is the gate across the inlet at Galveston, at the Bolivar Roads inlet, because that inlet is basically, it's the linchpin for the whole system. If we don't get that in place, everything else has to be much bigger to be able to address the threat of surge that we're looking at coming in from the Gulf. And so this is a ways out. This is at least, let me show you the outlook is under costs. If you go look at the cost card, the outlook for Clear Lake is the 3rd or 4th button down here. There we are. So Clear Lake is at least 7 years from that 2023. Okay, so that's 2030 before we can start plans and designs for Clear Lake. And Dickinson is 12 years out from 2023. So that's 2035. Am I doing the math right? 2035. So these are future projections, future efforts. Do not stop what you're doing because of this project, okay? Because this is a ways out.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I hate to make anybody think, oh my God, they've got to sell their house or they got to change their plans, because this is a long-term outlook for this whole study. All right, let's cruise down to Dickinson so that we don't take up too much more of your time. I'll zoom in and get you there, and then it's not populating, so hold on just a minute. I get it to set itself. There we go. Scott, you want to talk about this one from the south to the north?
Okay, so Dickinson is the same concept as what we did at Clear Creek. A little bit different in the presentation and a little bit of the backstory to it, but we start on the south with a flood wall kind of tying into a high ground area. We go to a pump station. Dickinson pump station is shown as a almost 20,000 cubic feet per second pump station, very similar, 19,500, similar to what the size of what we were, or capacity of what we were showing at Clear Lake, Clear Creek.
Mhm.
And there we go. Pump station is going to be, through or under the existing 146 bridge that crosses Dickinson Bayou. From there, we've got some circulation gates, navigation structure, because Dickinson Bayou is also the same or similar federal channel that what's is at Clear Creek, although I think it's a 100-foot here versus 75 there. Some continuation of circulation gates, and then a T-wall structure that ties back in close to what's that, 646 or 517, where it ties back in.
Yeah, 646. Yeah.
So with this, we anticipate having a little more dredging and maybe management off to the east towards Galveston Bay, and some land that will be taken out for the placement of the pump station based off of this current preliminary design. But conceptually, it's very similar to what we had at Clear Lake. Sorry.
So I heard early on that there were some people that really had an interest in the Dickinson Bay plan. Is there any questions?
This is Larry Milliken. In reference to Dickinson, I thought that Dickinson had some sort of obstruction and conveyance closer to the bay, and where Dickinson Bayou actually enters into the bay. That shoal area, I guess, that your map is showing to some degree. I thought that there was some problem with conveyance in that area. And with your floodgates being all the way back here, I just was, I guess concerned a little bit about that. And your plan doesn't address any of that?
So similar to the plan at Clear Creek, where we know there's areas that we still need to look at. We need to check and make sure that we're tying back in. Do we need to come all the way back to the Tech City levee to close the loop, or can we stop where we're showing right now? The Tech City levee is noted there as Skyline Drive, around that part where it ties into the water reservoir. Are we going to need to do further improvements to the east to get the water out to Galveston Bay in the area that you're concerned with? And also, are we going to need to do some improvements maybe back further to the west to get the water to the pump station? So those are not captured in the overall plan view here, but there are areas that we know are refinements in PED where we'll have to take in and verify. Some of the questions on the discharge is, if the pump's running while there is a surge in Galveston Bay, then where's the water really going? Is it going across the land that's underwater now, or is it going out of the channel? And how does that look? And we just don't have that level of analysis yet to see where that is. But the inducement comment goes in both ways. So we can't take and cause damage here at what's shown as Avenue S and Avenue R, where Kelly was kind of circulating, because we have a plug, for lack of a better term, towards the east of that then backs up water on those properties during operation of the pump station. So those are things that we've got to refine our model as we move forward, but we're just not there yet on the analysis.
Thank you.
Hey, Scott, Hank Doogie here. Is the Corps looking at doing dredging to the east of 146 outside of the coastal barrier project? Because it's probably getting to the point where it will need to be dredged again. Our group went and did a tour of the bayou a couple weeks ago, and we just don't think that it can wait another 13 years for it to get dredged. So is that something y'all are looking at?
So I am not aware of any discussion of dredging Dickinson Bayou. I'm not sure if Kelly is.
No, I'm not either. No, I'm not either.
But just I'm actually in the construction management section now. I'm not in engineering. I'm just still attached to this project because Kelly has asked me to. So maybe things there that's going on at the Corps that we're not aware of. I would say Byron Williams would be a person to contact, but I don't think he's the contact anymore at the Corps to find an answer to that question. Kelly may
probably Chris Bravata is the person to talk to, because he's operations, and he would be the one he's the one who's monitoring all the dredging. Or Trisha Campbell. Those two are our go-tos for all the dredging operations across the entire district. So they should be able to tell you not only what's happening now, but what the future plans are for the next years based on budgets.
Yeah, and you could mark Trisha off of that. Trisha works for me now in construction. So,
I had no idea. So Chris Bravata is the name. So if you need that contact, Peggy, you guys can reach out to me through an email, and I can get you in touch with Chris. Okay?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Any more questions about Dickinson? Okay, well, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. One of the things that I want to point out again is that this website, this homepage, is out there for you to explore. We didn't talk about the Bolivar Gate systems or the beach and dune systems, nor did we really talk about things that are happening up in this area that's not on Dickinson and Clear Lake, like the non-structural features. The plan does include proposed floodproofing and raisings of particular areas, specifically that yellow area that's highlighted or thatched on the maps that go in front of Clear Lake and in front of Dickinson, and in front I mean towards the bay side. That is still under consideration in this plan, because the surge would come through those areas and then would hit the higher elevations and then would bounce back. And so they're kind of left outside of the protection. And so our solution to that is raisings and floodproofing. We have not indicated yet, pinpointed house by house, the structures that we're talking about. We just did a large estimate of potential raisings or potential floodproofing that would be necessary, but that again is something being proposed for this region. And so I wanted to make sure that you were aware of that. Nor did we talk about the ecosystem restoration features that are being proposed, mostly because they're not in this region. They're mostly down on the coastline, right along the GIWW, and then all the way down to South Padre. So go to the story maps if you're really interested in that to get a better feel for those. There's also potential impact analysis that we have conducted thus far, where we could not avoid and minimize environmental impacts. We have proposed a mitigation plan that involves some restoration features in the bay to offset the potential impacts of these features, Clear Lake, Dickinson, but also the Bolivar Roads Inlet and the Galveston Ring Barrier. So those we didn't get to because we don't have enough time today, but I just want to point you back to this main page, because it's the front portal. It's where to start if you've got a question about what the plan entails, where we're headed, how we have assessed and came up with the designs, and basically where we're going to put out new information as we progress into the next phase. We do have a Facebook page. We have a Twitter account. I'm not a millennial, so I don't tweet, but I have millennials that work on that part. So if you have questions, you can always reach us through those two social media outputs. And Peggy, I think with that, if there's more questions, we'll take them, or we can conclude.
I just have one more question. This is Robert Griffon. Looking at the big picture on the Coastal Texas study, we're looking at $26.2 billion for the entire Corpus Christi to Port Arthur or whatever. And I'm just wondering what that cost is and what kind of percentage cost share partner we would have to have for the Clear Lake, Clear Creek portion. If it's all $26.2 billion, what are we looking at for Clear Creek, Clear Lake, and what are we looking at for Dickinson?
So we're looking, it's a 65-35 break for each of those features. And the costs for I get the Clear Lake and Dickinson together is 2.4 billion. The Clear Lake is running at about 1.5 billion and Dickinson is 879 million. So it would be 35% of those would be the cost share. And as Tony mentioned, that that entity that the legislature is proposing in their bills would be a 5, did you say 5? Yeah, 5 county organization entity that would oversee the cost share responsibilities for.
And that's a House bill.
Right,
There's
it's a House bill and a Senate.
There's a House bill, and that's HB 3029 and
Right.
SB 1160.
Right.
The Senate bill has already gone out of committee. The House bill is still in committee.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Kelly, this is Peggy. Thank you
Go ahead.
very much for an excellent presentation. I think what we'll do in the interest of time is I'll work with Larry and we'll decide a mechanism by which maybe we can collect more questions if people have them, and then I'll consolidate the list and forward it to you, and maybe we could keep an ongoing dialogue if it works for you, and we'll try to look at a plan that as we progress in the future, invite you back and keep a status. But thank you very much for spending the time with us, entertaining our questions, and on behalf of someone who flooded in Harvey and has a great interest in looking forward to the future with great hope, I really appreciate your time and that of your team.
Well, we were delighted to be here, and thank you for all your good questions, and we look forward to more and long-term collaborations and coordination together.